Imagine a day where children are guided and nurtured in a way that honors their unique humanness. A day where, instead of being expected to change in order to fit in, children can be met right where they're at. Welcome to Where They're Planted, a podcast for parents and care providers of unique children. Caring for a child with a developmental, emotional, or behavior challenge, a neurodiverse brain, or difficult early life experiences can be confusing and exhausting. On this podcast, we'll help your child flourish and strengthen their roots by helping you not only understand them, but also gain the skills to help them bloom where they're planted. We'll use brain science, nervous system tools, collaborative strategy sessions, and a deep understanding of the developmental process to create a fertile environment around your child in order to nurture their growth. I am your host, Jen Bluske, an occupational therapist with over 25 years of experience and a parent coach. My most closely held title, however, is that of a single mom of 2 thriving adopted kids, so I have walked this walk. I am truly excited to share, teach, and dive into these important topics on each episode.
Welcome back to Where They're Planted. We have been spending some of our time on this episode breaking down the components of occupational therapy and helping to solidify for you what they mean to your child in terms of development and growth. And over the past podcasts, we have been strongly alluding to motor planning as a topic in so many episodes. So today, we are going to dig into the nitty-gritty of what we mean by motor planning as occupational therapists and how we can meet our kids right where they are at as they learn this important skill. I want to start by defining motor planning a little bit for you. Motor planning, usually referred to as praxis, is the process by which children learn to plan and execute movements in order to create a coordinated and purposeful action. So I'm going to get a little nitty-gritty for you here because this idea of motor planning when we're looking at our kids is just so vital to so much of their function. And so when we look at motor planning, there's 3 components that we want to think about. The first is, do we have an idea? Does an idea pop up for us, and is there an idea formed? Okay, so what do we need to do? What's the action? What do we want? Right? So for a child, the idea stage might be, I want to climb up on the counter to get the cookie. Or the idea stage might be, I really want to go and talk to that friend. I want to ask them to play. Or the idea might be, I need to get my school things and get out the door. Okay, so ideas can happen in many ways. The second one is sort of that sequencing or the actual plan of what actual steps do we need to do to create and to solve or to complete this idea that we have. And then the third one is execution. So that's the actual action of completing the steps. This is so vital in the world of occupational therapy when we're looking at our kids and when we're looking at their ability to function. Motor planning or praxis is part of executive function. And so for a lot of our kids with ADHD or autism, we talk a lot about executive function. Well, this is sort of one of those foundational pieces that builds in order to create executive function. And so when you show up to an occupational therapy appointment and your therapist says, hey, we need to work on motor planning, and then we do an obstacle course, right? Let's talk a little bit about why we're focusing on this so much. So for our children, effective motor planning or praxis is crucial for just about all of the activities that kids do. If we see difficulties with motor planning, it can often lead to kids who aren't able to fully participate in their daily lives, their play, their academics, their self-care skills. And so one thing that we look at that's often underneath some of the more obvious behaviors or obvious challenges is motor planning. So I want to take a minute and I just want to talk through, you as a parent might be thinking, oh, why is this important to my child? The trick is with this motor planning thing is it often looks really hidden. It's not the thing that our brains as parents would go to as what we need to support in our child. And here's why. Motor planning challenges can look like frustration. So the classic frustration is the child goes to put their shoe on and they scream and they throw their shoe. Or the child says, I'm not getting out of bed. I'm not getting up today. I don't want to go to school. Or the child might say, I'm bored. I just need my electronics. I'm bored. I don't know what to do. I'm just so bored. And so what we see is this like building frustration around engaging really in their environment. When I see that in a child as an OT, when I'm assessing, one of the first things I'm going to look at is how their motor planning skills are. The second thing we sometimes see with our kids who are struggling with motor planning challenges is avoidance. They're just going to avoid it altogether. Or I need help. You need to help me pull up my pants. Or I'm not going to go to swimming class today. Or I don't want to play with my friend. I want to sit in my room on my electronics. They're going to just really make their world a little bit smaller, because if we really think about engaging in our world, we are in this constant feed forward and feedback loop of, I'm going to do this activity. I'm going to make this plan. I'm going to walk into the kitchen and get a glass of water, and whoops, that didn't work because I opened the cupboard and there aren't any clean glasses. Now what? Right? So that's motor planning. Or I want to go play with my favorite toy. Uh-oh, it's not on the shelf where I thought it was. Now what? So we see kids start to avoid activities. Another thing we sometimes see that can be a clue that there might be a motor planning challenge is increasing anxiety, especially with something that's new or especially with something that might be challenging. And so this might be, Mom, don't leave me at the birthday party. Or it might be, I don't want to go onto the field. I'm too scared to go onto the field to play soccer. I know that this happened with my kids, that when there were some motor planning challenges, there was this like, I need you right next to me, Mom, because we as parents, attuned parents, we're often supporting those motor planning pieces for our kids without even knowing it, right? We might say, well, first you're going to get on the field, and then when the ball comes to you, you're going to kick it, but you're going to stay over by this goal post. We're like helping line up those steps or that sequencing for our kids without realizing it. And so that anxiety of, can I do it myself, really starts to pop up. The other thing that we see when there's motor planning challenges is that just ability to learn, right? Let's say, if we have assignments at school, if we have a hard time sort of organizing around it and lining it up, it can really impact a child's just ability to learn. And so what we see is that learning becomes this arduous thing, even if the learning itself isn't challenging for the child. We see this a lot actually with our twice exceptional learners. Our twice exceptional learners are kids who often are very bright, right? Their cognition might be very high for their age, but their ability to plan and take in sensory information might be more challenging for them. And so we see this disconnect in that they're learning. They know they can learn this stuff, but it's so tricky. And then we sort of see some behavior challenges often pop up. And then the last thing that we often want to think about motor planning for is when we're seeing behavior challenges, right? We're seeing acting out. We're seeing needing constant control. We're seeing kids who, are just really struggling behaviorally. Sometimes we want to think about motor planning. What we know of kids and what I believe with kids is kids do their best. Kids do their best to learn and engage in their world. And when we're seeing strategies, which sometimes aren't super functional, like negative behaviors, there is an underlying reason as to why that's happening. In my experience, motor planning is often one of them. So let's talk through just a little bit what we do as occupational therapists in order to support motor planning, why this is such a big deal, and then what you can do as parents in order to facilitate this in your children. So when I see a child who comes in the door who might be able to complete an activity if quote unquote, the stars align, meaning everything's the same and we have this consistent cues and the environment's calm, but then isn't able to do that when the stars don't align, right? Maybe there's some distraction, or maybe, we had to put a tall sock on versus a short sock, or maybe we are in a different room than we're used to, things like that. That makes me go, man, there's some motor planning stuff going on here. So what we're going to do as OTs is, first things first, is we're really going to look at how kids are processing sensory information. Examples is we're going to say, man, when the environment is really scattered, when there's a lot to visually look at, I notice that they're not able to do things in a stepwise fashion. That's information. They're overwhelmed from a visual perspective. And so, that's impacting their motor planning. Maybe we can work on visual processing. I might do the same with auditory processing. If there's a lot of distraction in the environment, is it impacting their ability? A classic one in our clinic setting is putting shoes and socks on in the waiting room, right? So the waiting room can often be sort of distracting and overwhelming and loud. And for a child who I know has like the motor skills to put their socks and shoes on, but when they get to the waiting room isn't able to, that tells me like, there might be a sensory processing piece to this right now. Another one might be that proprioceptive body awareness is not giving them a really clear feed-forward feedback loop. So let's talk about this a little bit. This is a big one, and I see this often when some of our kids get a little bit older. 9, 10, 11 is when we classically see this, where the parent often comes to me and says something like, they knew that what they were doing, they threw their backpack at me and then they got in trouble. Or they knew that it was too hard and they slammed the dish on the counter and they broke it. When I hear that sort of report back from a parent, the first thing I'm thinking is, does this child have the feedback loop of how hard or how light they need to do something? So for example, if I set a glass on the counter, over time, my body has told me, oh, it's this heavy. I need to use this much force. I haven't thought about this one bit until now, but my brain has just adapted and has showed me that. If your body awareness, proprioceptive input isn't working well for you, those feedback loops aren't giving you the information you need to change it. And so it can oftentimes look like noncompliance, behavioral challenges, being sassy or naughty, when really it's, oh, my body didn't get it. It's not paying attention. My brain isn't paying attention to the input that is coming in. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're really going to help create some understanding for the child and for the parent of how those sensory systems are working for a child. And then what we're going to do is some good treatment in order to help organize that. We can really shift what that looks like by giving the brain some really organized, consistent messages through sensory systems. So that is sensory integration therapy at its core. The other thing that we can do, that we do, is we help break activities down. So most of us, when we were, in second, third grade, had the homework where we had to write all the steps to making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich or something to that effect. And we all learned during that activity that there's like 52 steps to making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, and you can continue to break it down. That's called task analysis. That's the ability to break a task down into the most minute steps in order to allow for the motor planning system to build upon itself. And so when we have a child maybe who has pretty decent ideation, they know what they want to do, but that sequencing is sort of out of line, we can work through breaking activities down with support in order to help the brain learn how to sequence an activity. We can help make it more manageable. And it's also a strategy that we can use in order to help a child have some success getting through a multi-step task. For us as parents, if your motor planning praxis system is working well for you, it's going to feel a little bit like you're giving a lot of extra support, right? So like I can put my shoes on and grab my phone and keys and talk on the phone and think about where I'm walking all at the same time. My motor planning system works for me in that way. For a child I'm working with, or for my child, doing all of those things at the same time might be too much. And so what we're looking at from an occupational therapy perspective is, can we pull it apart? Can we slow it down in order to allow the brain to have some success? And when the brain has some success, that means we're teaching the brain. We're teaching the brain to change. We also do things like use of visuals, right? We know for a lot of our kids, especially our neurodivergent kids or our kids with ADHD or kids on the autism spectrum, adding visuals of broken down steps can be incredibly helpful. How many of us parents listening right now have lists of things to do on their phones, right? That's a visual that we give ourselves. And so those lists of visuals, and they could be done in many different ways, is a way of breaking a task down and supporting motor planning. Another activity that we do in order to support motor planning is through the use of play, helping children sort of explore what happens if I do it this way. Whoops, that didn't work. What happens if I do it that way? Oh, that worked. What happens if I pull the chair up to the counter but leave 2 feet between the chair and the counter? I can't reach the counter now. What happens if I move the chair a little closer? Oh, that worked. That is the feed-forward feedback loop that our brain needs in order to solidify and learn our motor planning skills. And so within play, the power of being a support to the child without fixing it for them. We know that it might not work, but we're just here and we're along for the ride as a supportive witness, can be some of the most powerful things. And for any of you parents listening who are in occupational therapy and sitting in sessions with us, and you're like, what in the world are they doing? And why aren't they fixing this for the kid? And why are they not telling them it's wrong? This is the why. This is why we're like, oh, you want to go way up there? All right, let's figure it out, because we're working with the neuroplasticity of the brain to allow the brain to go through that process. And so sometimes this looks like play, and it's very, very thoughtful cueing and thoughtful environmental design that we're setting up in order to get the brain in that just right place where it can learn through the motor planning systems. And then the last thing we're going to do in occupational therapy, as always, circles through in this podcast, is we're going to teach you as the parent. We're going to teach you how to observe your child when motor planning is challenging, to be able to pick up on the subtle cues, not to let them out of the activity. That's not the goal. Our goal isn't to just step in and do for our child. That isn't going to help and support change. However, if we can teach a parent, if we can teach you to watch for those subtle signs when things are breaking down from a motor planning perspective, then we can have you create the brain shift all throughout the week in order to teach the brain more adept motor planning. So this is, oh, your child is struggling. They might be throwing their shoe because they can't get their shoe on and it's too many steps and they're distracted. Can you break the task down for them right in the moment? Oh, buddy, sit here on this step. Here's your shoe, to create the success, to create the successful feedback loop. Can you, as the parent, when you're noticing that you're trying to redirect and do homework in a very crowded environment, be like, oh, this is too many steps to do with all of the sensory input happening right now. So either I need to reduce the sensory input so my child can do the steps, or I need to make there be less steps in order to create success, in order to create change. As a parent, we can see and notice that there's difficulties with planning all of the things that need to go in the backpack for soccer. And we can whip out a piece of paper and be like, all right, bud, let's work together. What do we all need for soccer today? And we can write it down or draw it out or whatever to help create an immediate visual in order to support success. We can, as parents, through play and downtime, create an opportunity for our child to have exploration. The very best place and time to do this is in nature, right? Can the child figure out how to climb up on the log and jump down? We'd be there for safety, but can we just notice what they're doing? Whoa, you pushed with your arms and it was a little too high. Oh man, you tried to jump and you fell right onto your hands. Oh, you attempted to pick up that stick, but it's too heavy for you. All of that witnessing that we're doing out loud for our child is feedback for the brain. It's feedback for the brain of, oh, that's what I need to adjust. Oh, that's what I need to change. And that's through connection. It's through play. It's through joy. And we know, because of all of the research, that the brain, the child brain, all of our brains, learns best through play. And so when we're talking about this nebulous motor planning component, and when you're coming into occupational therapy, likely with a challenge with behavior, or my child isn't listening, or they're not able to, follow through with their daily routines, and then your OT says, well, let's look at motor planning. Hopefully, this is an opportunity to begin to understand why we're often starting at this place. So if you're in OT, ask your therapist about it and ask the strategies that you can do at home. If you're not in OT and this is ringing some sort of bell for you, like, oh, this is a component I hadn't considered for my child, feel free to reach out to somebody and ask the question, because it can be really, really transformative to your child. I think I'll leave it right there. Thanks so much. Hello, Where They're Planted listeners. I wanted to pop on here and remind you of our Thriving Parents Collective online courses. If you like what you hear on this podcast and are seeking more, check out this resource. This course offers you over 9 educational videos and 50 pages of self-reflective workbook in order to guide you through the process of integrating connected parenting strategies into your day-to-day life. Listen when it's convenient for you and use the content as the foundation for a shared language between you and your partner or family members. In addition, access one-to-one sessions with a parent coach to support individualized strategies to help you meet your child right where they're planted. For listeners, access this course for $99 by using the code THRIVING at the checkout. We look forward to having you join our Thriving Parents Collective. Where They're Planted is a Lit Path Studios podcast and is produced by Jamie Gale and Jen Bluske. Music is by Gaston Reen and Pod 5. Thank you for loving your child right where they're planted.